This is Hell Let Loose. It's an FPS Mil Sim. In my mind, it's the more casual cousin of Postscriptum or Squad. I've been playing this game for quite some time. I've made friends, lost friends, and had all kinds of experiences with it. And with the Team 17 acquisition, I thought now might be the last time to talk about the game before it goes to the dogs. Or doesn't. Who knows? Historically, whenever a big company buys an IP, it goes to shit within a few years. I'm sure plenty of examples come to mind. I can't think of one occasion where something good has come from an acquisition. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. Hell Let Loose is a gritty, hardcore Mil Sim, but I consider it to be a little more casual than its peers. You have a very limited HUD, you need to rely on your team for placing spawn points, vehicles are hard to use, time to kill is very low, respawning can take up to 50 seconds, and communication is vital. On the other hand, you do have a ping and marker system, the game has somewhat ahistorical weapons and skins, you have hit indicators, and even though the game emphasizes good communication and hour-long matches, it can be picked up and played a bit more casually. Perhaps one of the game's strongest selling points is its presentation. The low UI combined with sound and graphics makes the game immersive as hell. Add a great suppression system and a lot of gore into the mix, and then you have a game that's genuinely terrifying at times. I still get a kick out of seeing a whole squad get blown up by a tank. Perhaps the most iconic though is the Commander's bombing run. When this creeping barrage is making its way towards you, you can't help but get a little bit excited. Really captures the essence of war and all that. The almost non-existent user interface especially helps you feel immersed, as it effectively reduces the layer that separates the player from the game. The game is powered by the Unreal Engine, and so naturally the lighting is really on point for a lot of the maps, and the textures aren't too bad either. Hell Let Loose uses a realistic combat and movement system. The guns all pack a punch, and the default rifle kills with a single shot. The automatic weapons have a lot of recoil, the LMG can barely be hip-fired, and explosives have a habit of turning you into giblets. No weapon in-game is really anywhere close to being a laser gun, and this actually complements the gameplay well. There's a suppression system that blurs your vision when you're getting shot at, which means your bullets can still incapacitate someone even if you're missing. I mean, just try and shoot back when your screen looks like this. Overall, the gunplay is really well integrated. However, the movement system is kind of irritating. The community has complained to no end about the recent increase in movement speed, which I actually liked because of how big all the maps are. My biggest complaint about it is how clunky it feels. There's a bit of an inertia system, which is fine. It makes sense that it takes a couple seconds to accelerate, but what bugs me is that you're constantly getting stuck on objects and losing all your momentum, because of some obtuse hitbox. The maps are filled with things that get in your way, and it's very frustrating when you die because of it. Plenty of objects your character will just run right over, but then others will bring you to a complete halt. With vehicles, it's on a whole other level. It's a complete gamble whether or not you can drive through something, and it's not rooted in realism at all. Some trees will stop you, while others won't. Sand berms on the side of the road are more of a barrier than stone walls. And trenches will get you stuck instantly, even though tanks were literally designed to drive over them. The only way you can know what will block you or not is honestly based off sheer experience. Map design in Mil Sim type games can be really important, and it's something I never really hear people talk about. Many of Hell Let Loose's earlier maps were really intelligently designed in the way they create natural funnels. 100 players in a single match sounds like a lot, but when you're spread over 2.4 square kilometers, it's almost not enough. Matches can be uneventful and frustrating if the combat is too far spread out across the map. It's a multiplayer game with player-created spawns, so this is unavoidable, but it happens a lot more on the open maps. See, the hedgerows of Utah or the streets of Quarantine funnel players into fights in a way that you still have a lot of room to flank and find angles. Maybe funnel isn't the right word, but rather they're effectively fighting spaces created by how the maps are segmented. I can best describe this with an example. Take Utah Beach here. The map is divided up into kind of open segments where you have long sight lines between cover. These kind of create fighting spaces as teams use the cover to advance, attack, defend, etc. All these roads and rivers have adjacent cover, so the maps aren't just big open fields. This means that despite the large map size, fighting is going to take place in select areas where teams can effectively advance. Because no one's going to try run through a field when there's an MG42 watching over. Most of the maps use wide open spaces quite sparingly, because the game just isn't fun when you're fighting over more than 200 meters. This is true for most of the maps, except for the newer ones. Hill 400 comes to mind. It's just a mountain covered in trees separating some strategic points. See, when running through hedgerows or courtyards, you can tell where an enemy might come from based on where there are natural entrances and cover. But if your whole map is just light cover, you just get shot from out of nowhere. I honestly could make a whole video on the strengths and weaknesses of each map. Most of them are well made and downright beautiful, but some of them are just unplayable. What's incredibly unique about Hell Let Loose is that it incorporates some real-time strategy mechanics, but they aren't emphasized unless you're playing certain classes. You could really play hundreds of hours and not really notice them. Your team has resources that the engineer class and the commander role manages. These resources help decrease spawn times, provide vehicles, and give the commander access to special abilities. These range from providing vehicles for the tank teams, to bombing runs that can change the course of the match if used correctly. The engineers are responsible for building the nodes that generate the resources, and then the commander can use them. Honestly, playing a class that interacts with the RTS mechanics makes you feel like you're playing a bigger role for your team, and are really contributing to its success. But again, if you're not interested in that, you can just pick up a gun and shoot people too. Playing the commander is like playing a whole different game altogether. You can sit back and use your abilities, sneak around and place garrisons, coordinate your team's efforts, and so much more. Now, in all honesty, this is the ideal. At best, on casual servers, you'll have a couple of dedicated squads who will listen to you, but as the game has matured, you can at least rely on someone to build resource nodes for you. As I mentioned before, the game makes use of player-made spawn points. Squad leads can place small outposts that only his squad can use, while commanders and squad leads can place garrisons for the whole team to spawn. However, this requires supplies which need to be airdropped in or placed by a support class or support truck. Garrisons usually require some level of collaboration to get built. All spawn points can be destroyed, and so you're constantly trying to find your enemy spawn points while they're trying to find yours. Therefore, the positioning of these are basically what wins games. Players honestly act like bots with these things and just spawn on the closest to the fight, and then beeline for the point. Squad leads and commanders can effectively corral players by where they put their spawns. If you want your players to attack from point A with a flank from point B, you can't select and order them like units in an RTS, but if you put a garrison on A and another on B, you can be damn sure that players will attack from those sides. Unlike its Mil Sim peers, Hell Let Loose doesn't have a ticket system, so killing dudes is less important than standing in the right place on the map, aka the capture points. The game actually does a lot to de-emphasize the importance of getting kills. Besides a sound for body shots and headshots, there aren't hit markers, and your kill count is hidden away in a second score screen. There is also no kill feed. The game is about teamwork more than individual success, after all. Interacting with the spawn mechanics is honestly the biggest barrier for new players. If you are spawning in a shit position and pushing a bad flank that's being watched by a tiger tank, you're going to have a bad time. I can see someone playing several hours of this game with a crap team and hating the experience because they keep spawning and dying. The low time to kill and the map size also means you'll often die without even seeing the dude who shot you. This could probably be fixed with some proper tutorials, because at the moment all we have are these text-based ones, and I'm sure no one is reading these. I think tutorials are on the devs' radar at least. New players also might not realize how essential the voice comms are. The game is so much more fun when your team and squad are communicating. The game goes from you dying all the time and not knowing what's going on, to knowing where the enemies are pushing from, knowing where their tanks are, or even where your team needs assistance. The game goes from a first-person shooter to a tactical and strategic team battle. As I mentioned before, there are several different roles in the game, that all have their own playstyle and gameplay mechanics. A big chunk of my time with the game has been driving around in tanks. You're playing Hell Let Loose, but tank combat is like a different game mode altogether. Information is important to the infantry, but for vehicles it's the difference between life and death. The enemy team has similar access to vehicles, albeit a slightly different roster, based on their faction. So the tank combat is largely trying to figure out where they are before they find you. It's a game of cat and mouse, but you're both the cat. In tank-on-tank combat, the first person to hit is 95% of the time the first one to die, provided both tank teams know what they're doing. Tanks are crewed by a team of 3, a driver, a gunner and a spotter. When you're all coordinating properly, you can be a real menace to the enemy team. Tanks can really change the tide of combat, but they are incredibly hard to use. Once you know what you're doing with them, it can be really rewarding, blowing up blobs of enemies.
Nice. Yep.
Hell Let Loose has a basic progression system. There are 10 or so different roles you can play and level up to unlock new weapons and camos. I'd like to say it's nothing game-breaking, but in a fight between a new player with a bolt-action rifle and a veteran with a Sturmgewehr 44, the latter will come out on top, 9 times out of 10. There are some really cool unlocks like flamethrowers and trench guns and, perhaps the most useful, repair tools for your tank crew. There are some neat camos and skins, but there's really not much to see here. I'm just glad there's no pink camouflage. Hell Let Loose is a bit of a clunky experience. It has its flaws, but it is a really intelligently designed game. It's just so captivating and immersive. You really can't find this kind of grit in any other first-person shooter, and that alone makes it one hell of a game. I've really enjoyed Hell Let Loose over the years. So I think I speak on behalf of the community when I say, Team 17, please don't fuck this up. Thanks for watching.